All right, guys. Well, welcome to the Chasing the Multiple podcast. Today, we've got a pretty special guest, a really, really good friend of mine, Han Butler, on here. And Han and I have known each other for a few years now. We've partnered on real estate projects. We've developed a pretty good friendship. And, we recently brought him in on the board of our venture fund. And so we wanted to, get him on here. He's got a really, really impressive background. He's done some pretty amazing things. Built a company to 5,000 employees and significant sums in revenue, significant amount of money raised within his company. And so we we wanted to bring him on here. He's got a lot of expertise in building sales teams and really building organizations that have a thriving culture and can go out there and win big bids. And he works with some of the biggest companies in the world that most people know every single day. And and a lot of times you're talking to his employees and you may not even know it. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Han. Han, do you mind kind of kicking things off and telling them a little bit about you and a little bit about your background and how you kind of got to where you're at right now?
Yeah, no, happy to talk about it. And thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I guess I can start out with back in the dot-com boom. I started out as a programmer. I taught myself how to program websites and so forth. So I got into this, more of this digital space, then had an opportunity to move from being a programmer and individual contributor into management. And that's where I got my first foray into people management, right? And business management and so forth, which was exciting, very challenging. From that point, ended up becoming vice president of a publicly traded company. A very exciting opportunity, especially at such a young age. And so I learned a lot during that process. And during that process, to give a little background and tie it into how we ended up with this company and growing it. So at that time, we wanted to be known for the customer experience. We wanted to know that we could differentiate ourselves from all the other competition by having the best experience. And so we ended up applying. Obviously, we built the processes, the systems, and our customer satisfaction ratings were high. But at the end of the day, we needed to make sure the world knew. And so we went out and applied for a bunch of awards, and one of them was like the JD Power of Associates of our space. And so, we go through all these really extensive audits, and next they call us one day and they say, "Hey, we'd like you to come out to our banquet." And so, we're thinking that'll be fun. It'll be fun to participate. We thought they just wanted some money out of us, But so we fly out there, and as they were making these announcements, they announce our company, and they say, "Come on up and give this speech." So that's when we knew, like, hey, this is a real deal. And there's like these giant Fortune 500 companies and all these other companies in the room, but our company was called up and given the award. So after that, we thought, man, maybe we have something here. Why don't we do BPO as a service, right? And so we went to the CEO of the company and said, "Listen, we have all these other services. Why don't we open up a division that's BPO for our customers?" Because we have a web hosting platform. We did training on digital marketing and so forth. And we thought this might be a good adjacency because they obviously all need to take phone calls, customer orders, and so forth. He obviously at that time was like, "Hey, that's not the direction we want to go. Let's go a different direction." And so that's when we decided, hey, let's go start something. And of course, we decided to do it during 2008. And for those of you who don't remember, worst economic time to start a business. But, we took it from there. And then, fast forward to today, we're, 5,000 employees across the globe. I think we're up to 8 locations across the globe, supporting 21 different languages for Fortune 500 companies and companies all across the board. Some that we know, more commonly household brands, and some that we don't.
That's awesome. I wanted to kind of dive into that on the scaling up 5,000 person company. You did that over a period of how long?
Yeah, so it was 2008 to now.
Okay. Yeah. So that, even with that, it's still a lot of growth. The 16 years, I was talking to a couple millennials, and yeah, you're right. The 2008 does have to start to be more explained a little bit now. So yeah, I love the background there and the BPO. And so for BPO, I understand BPO, and I'm sure a lot of people do, but for anyone that doesn't, kind of dive into that real quick, what BPO is, what companies use it, really what the breadth of that is.
You bet. No, yeah. So BPO stands for business process outsourcing. And so most people, when they think about it, the easy correlation is just contact center services, right? But when we think about it, it's more it's multi-pronged, because when you say business process outsourcing, you're thinking about anything that could be process oriented, can be outsourced. And so that could include back office, so email, chat, SMS. And so it's really expansive outside of just the phone service side of it.
Hmm. So what's the hardest part? Going from, how many employees did it have when you joined the team? Because I know you were kind of a late stage co-founder, and they were fairly small. What was the employee count when you joined, and um, what was it then?
Yeah, that's a good question. So 2008 is when the company launched. I came and joined at the beginning of 2013. And at that time, I was probably employee 100. We were still using, lifetime tables, these little plastic tables in rooms, and trying to set up computers on them. But so yeah, employee 100. You fast forward to 2018, which is when we raised some capital. We had this glass ceiling of about 600 employees. And every time we tried to get past it, we just found ourselves not being able to accelerate through that. And that's when we decided we needed to raise some capital, because there are certain investments that we believed. I mean, when it's your money, when you say, "Hey, I'm going to spend $100,000," and it's coming out of your paycheck, it's harder to make those decisions. And so that's when we decided, hey, let's bring on a partner, so that way we can start thinking about it strategically and not emotionally/financially, right?
So how did you? I've got two questions about that. First, how did you go about vetting who you wanted to raise money from? What did that process look like? Because obviously there's a ton of people out there you can get money from. You can go to a VC company, you can go to a private equity fund, you can go to private investors, you can bring in more partners. There's a lot of different routes you can go. And then even once you narrow down, like, okay, I want to go the private equity route, what was the vetting process? How did you guys select, which company you ended up going with, and what was kind of the determining factor there?
It's a great question. So at first, I mean, obviously, this is our first foray into this, and we had no experience, no exposure, didn't know much about it. So we started, people were always calling us, trying to ask us if we were interested. And so finally, we started answering those phone calls. And next thing you know, we were under LOI. But what we found during this journey, we were under LOI several times over a 2-year period, which was extremely exhausting, because you have to go through the audits and so forth. And on top of your day job, you're trying to raise funds and come up with the information that they need for due diligence, right? The first couple ones we went through, it was a very frustrating experience, because we'd go through the entire rigor of it, only to find out they never had the capital. And so I think that was lesson number one for us, is you got to make sure that whoever you're working with already has the capital raised. And that was, a couple black eyes, and probably about a year and a half of just drudging through it, very exhausting. And it was a huge distraction to our business, right? At the end of the day, we're trying to do this while also trying to run our business. And so you could see the impact to our revenue and our growth, despite not wanting that to happen. I would say the next one we found was like personality match, right? Because there's sometimes we found a couple of partners that they just didn't get along with us, right? And you could tell that they were probably either, let's say, for example, more authoritarian. They wanted to come in and take control, and versus being advisors. And we found that was going to be a challenge to work with that person for years, right? And so I think the final stage is finding someone who was, like I said, an advisor, but could help you grow. A good example is one of the investment firms we were talking to. You look at their portfolio and what they've been able to do, and talking to some of the other companies within the portfolio, you hear that, right? Whether it was useful to them, but also when, for example, in our space, BPO, if you look at the portfolio and say, there's a lot of opportunity for BPO and contact center work in their portfolio, that's clear, right? And so you say, hey, maybe there's some good adjacencies here, there's some partnership here. Whereas if all they do is they sell food service, maybe that's not a good partnership, right? And so it's a good way to think about it. But on top of that, you take the leadership and say, what kind of experience do they have? What connections do they have? So a lot of things that we had to think about that we learned in a 2-year period. And, we finally settled on one that we felt matched all of those criteria.
So I've got
Yeah,
a, I've got a,
that's huge.
I've got a kind of an interesting question, but so how did the game plan differ between, when you decide, okay, I'm going to go get money, you're crafting kind of your use of funds and how you're going to utilize the money. How did that change before, like when you're under LOI and you're in the process of raising the capital versus after you have the money and you actually start deploying it, you know, like how did that change? Did you guys end up, did you follow that game plan to a T, or where did, like, do you look at it and you're like, okay, we need to double down on manpower? We initially thought, because I know at some point you guys made a hard transition really big into partnerships, and you have probably one of the most insane partnership divisions I've ever seen in any company. From your ability to gift partners to your ability to get them paid and have people make a lot of money by bringing you guys business, and you've got a very unique structure there. So was that part of the use of funds initially, or was that something you guys developed later? Were you planning on building out a bigger internal sales team, or at what point did you guys transition to say, okay, we're still going to have an internal sales team, but we really want to focus on this partnership side as well?
No, that's a good point. I think when I think about that time, what our original plan with the funds and what we ended up with was very different things. And I think what's nice about choosing the right partner is they kind of challenge your thinking in a way that if you choose the right one, they make it in a way that you're thinking, gosh, I wish I would have thought of that. Right. And so, for example, at the time we had, maybe a handful of partners that we thought that was exciting for us. But then they pointed out, hey, have you thought about it from an angle that you might have concentration risk? That what happens when one of these partnerships decides they don't like you or decides that they want to go a different direction? And it opens up your eyes from an advisory standpoint to think, you're right, we need to invest more there. And so that's when we started thinking, okay, we have a lot of concentration risk, things you don't think about from a valuation standpoint when you're just these small P's and all you want to do is raise funds. But then you start thinking about creating investor value, and you have to think about diversifying and decreasing concentration risk. And then also specializing and really outlining your ideal customer profile, your ICP. Because at the time it was like, hey, we'll take anyone who wants our services. But then we started getting a little more specific about who was our customer and who wasn't our customer. And it's saved us a lot of time, because I think we were taking on a lot of project work at the time, saying, hey, this is a 6-month project. Why not? It's revenue, right? Instead, thinking that really doesn't add a lot of value and it takes a lot of work. And so instead of working, spending your energies here, why don't you redirect that energy to something that's going to be more exponential?
Yeah, I want to know, in going through those processes of raising, how many pitches do you think you guys did before you finally landed on that one that you're like, these are the guys, they have the money, vertically aligned from a strategic thought leader processes, watching your back kind of thing? How long did it take? How many meetings did that take with them, and then also separately to finding them?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about it, I like to, every now and then I cry inside, but we ended up probably having 4 LOIs, and we kissed a lot of ugly frogs to get to just the 4 LOIs. And so we were, towards the end, we met with a lot. We tried to be a little more methodical about it. And interestingly enough, the third company that we were under LOI with, one of the advisors on it, he didn't realize they didn't have funds. And so finally, when they told him, hey, number one, we don't have funds, and number two, you're out of a job, he came back to us and said, listen, let me go find someone who has funds and let's do this, because I think we have something great we could really build on this. And so he went out there and he started going through the interview process, having a lot more experience and exposure in the industry. It got us to the final stage, right? And so when we took a look at the finalists, they were established companies. So for example, the company we partnered with, I think we were in their 4th fund, and now they're on their 5th fund, right? And so just, they had a track record. And, as we met with them, they never told us what to do. They asked you questions to challenge your thinking. And it's almost like at the end of the day, it's an interview to make sure you're understanding your business the right way. and seeing it from an investor's view, which then in turn, that's really where you want to be.
Yeah, I think the power in capital raising as like a self-induced training is so powerful, because the amount that you can learn. I don't think any meeting is wasted meetings. I mean, you have a lot of meetings when you're raising capital in any regard, whether it's debt, private equity, venture, angel, whatever. It's a whole nother job in itself of setting the meetings and meeting with them and getting insight. But I think all those insights have a ton of value behind them. To make sure if you're not jumping on, whatever the first thing is that comes in, and you actually are sitting there trying to do what you did, which I think is huge for people because there's so much dry powder and so much capital out there to go fall into the hands of somebody who's just capital with no extra oomph or no extra value on top of that is really doing yourself a disservice, because there is so much capital out there. You should be able to find somebody that aligns in some type of benefit over and above just capital, right?
So what advice would you have? No, carry on.
Good.
I was going to say, what advice would you have? You go. You go. Nope, I'm done. You go.
Okay. I would say, I do wish, although it was a good learning process and a good journey, and we learned a lot during that. So I feel like it was educational, so it wasn't time wasted. But at the end of the day, if we could learn that in a shorter period of time, it would have saved us 2 years of trouble, and it probably would have only taken us 6 months, right? And so, yes, I do think it's valuable. I don't regret that journey because of how much I learned, but I do wish, hindsight being 2020, that we could have saved our time and been focusing on growing our business and just get straight to the finish line of interviewing the right individuals and the right investment firms and so forth, rather than going through the mess of people who didn't have fun.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for, a founder they've got a business, they're producing revenue, and they're starting to venture into that idea of, we need money, we've got a great product, we've got a great business, we've got a great idea, we need gasoline for the fire. What advice would you have for somebody that's at that stage? They're a small to mid-sized company, and they need to go raise their first round of capital. What advice would you have for them as far as preparation or game planning or finding the right partner? What would be your thought on that?
Yeah, I would say when we look at businesses that we're looking to acquire, and then partnerships, with investment firms and so forth, I think the one thread that's been common for us is that, for example, when we're buying a business, the business could be great, but you're actually investing in people, right? And so when you take a look at the leadership team and the team that you're investing in, these are the ones that have to execute. The same thing goes on the investment side, right? These are the people you're going to have to work with. And so making sure that they're people you can work with, that you feel like are going to add value to your business, but also help kind of de-risk yourself. Because I think an example I have is we're HIPAA compliant, so we can do healthcare accounts, right? And so at the time, it was going to cost us $14,000 to get someone to audit us so we could officially say we can do healthcare, right? And so it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, if you build it, they will come, was our hope. At the time, we were probably, when I think about it, we're probably an $8 million company. So a $14,000 expense for something that's more aspirational it's hard to do. And we had conversations for months and months. Do we do this? Do we not? Do we do this? Do we not? And so when you get to that point in your business where you're making that decision and it's holding you back, it's almost fear-based. I think that's when we realized we may want to think about partnering with someone, right? When we thought about, hey, this is working, our marketing is working, our engine is working, but let's only do a couple $1,000s more this year. Instead of really saying, why aren't we taking the pedal to the metal? Why aren't we taking it to the next level and accelerating our growth? And another part of it is fear, because fear of every time you grow your business, you're taking cash because you have to do payroll. And so you're not able to take as much cash out of the business. And so you're thinking about silly things like that that hold you back. And once we made that decision, all those decisions, all those fears were taken off the table. I mean, you still think about it with a method, but now you're not fear based, you're process based, and you're thinking through it. You're building a plan, and you're able to execute on it faster.
It's a great insight.
Yeah, and I guess the way I would describe it is there's two different mindsets. There's the mindset of abundance, and then there's the mindset of where there's at the end of the day there's abundance, and I guess what's another term for the opposite of that? Yeah,
Comfortability.
yeah, and
comfortability with mediocrity, I guess.
yeah, and that's like a lot of the when you feel like there's not enough, you start like hoarding things, right? And you're saying, hey, I'm afraid of the future. But when you have this approach from abundance versus scarcity, that's what I was trying to find. Scarcity versus abundance. When you have this fear of a scarcity, you make different decisions. But if you look at it from an abundance mentality, you have an open mind and you're approaching it differently. And so moving from once we got the investment, we went from scarcity to abundance, and the decisions you're able to make because of that are refreshing, because then you see the rewards faster. You see the things that you've been thinking about but afraid to do come to life.
Yeah, I think that whole reinvesting in your company, because when you say all that, I get it but in my mind, it goes straight to hiring, right? Because it's a very similar concept of that first hire or that second hire that's non-revenue generating. And it's like a lot of people, I see it all the time, years before they get that role in. And then the second they get that role in, their business doubles or, goes up 30%, and they offset that cost like overnight. And then they're like, why did I not do this so long ago, right? And I think that's something that related to your scarcity mindset, the fear-based mindsets that like really hold back people just because of fear, and the power that's over that hump when you take the leaps, that you start realizing some of these epiphanies that you're like, oh my gosh, right?
Yeah, because there's so many. Everyone wants like a 5,000 person company, right? But like when you start actually building that, there's so many hard decisions you have to make. I imagine that as you start growing, and you're like, okay, every person you hire, especially when you're starting out, you're a smaller company. When you're hiring more people, you're taking pay directly from yourself. So it's like you're temporarily hurting yourself for the long term benefit of the company, and that's a hard pill that most entrepreneurs don't like to swallow, because they start a business, it starts making money. They're like, shoot, I'm making money. I'm making a couple $100,000 or 500 or 700 grand a year or whatever, and I'm living comfortably now. And they get kind of stuck there. And then it's like, okay, I want to grow, but for them to grow, they have to take a step back. They have to decrease what they're taking in order to be able to bring on more people. And it's like totally counterintuitive to what your intuition wants and what we selfishly want. But in order to get there, I imagine you crossed that boat probably 100 different times, where you're like, okay, we want to scale. We want to go hire more people. We need another 100 people or another 500 people or another 1,000 people. And it's like, okay, but in order to do that, we're going to have to cut back in these areas. We might take a temporary pay cut for long-term benefit, that I may not see for the next 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, but I know eventually it's going to pay off. I imagine you probably had to go through that quite a bit.
Yeah, no, there was a period of time where, everyone wants the big contracts and so forth. We closed this big contract. It should be an exciting time for us. But after that, the consequence to us was we had to get a pay cut, right? The executives didn't take pay. And and one of the other things is, so in our business, we bill for people, right? But the challenge is you still have to carry that payroll until someone pays you. And then the other fear that comes out is, what if they don't pay me? And that's happened to us. We've had a lot of bad debt where people that we thought would pay us didn't pay us. Or let's say, for example, during the pandemic, we had a lot of retail customers who went bankrupt and they didn't pay us. And when it's your business, that hurts more than when you take a look at it from just you have an investment partner who's always there to back you. And yeah, it hurts and you don't hit your numbers and it's unfortunate, but you have the line of credit, you have the financial backing behind you that says, we'll get through this, versus saying, dude, I got to sell this company. I don't want to do this anymore. I just lost $5 million in bad debt, right? And that's your money out of your pocket.
Yep. So I've got a question. So when it comes to picking like people around you, other executives, like I've met several people on your team. You've got a great team. And when it comes to picking, your VPs or your high level people around you that, come with big expectations and a lot of times, big payroll, you know, burdens. What are the biggest things you look for in that person? Because obviously people's resume only tells half the story. When you sit down with people, you find out a lot more than you do from looking at a piece of paper. When you're hiring for roles that are critical, because when you go raise money too, and you're looking to raise money from PE or VC or whoever, they're going to look at those people too. Those people are a representation of you and your team. How do you go? What's your vetting process for bringing in like people around you that you work with closely that have a really big influence on the company? What are some of the things you look for?
Yeah, I would say what I've learned over the years is number one, you have to find people who care. You can't train caring no matter how much you want. If you've hired someone who just doesn't care or only partially cares, then guess what? You're always going to get those results of someone who doesn't care. I think that's first. I'd rather hire someone with less experience, but can tell that they're passionate, they care, they're going to represent your brand and just take it like it's their own. Um, and then, I would say from there, like for example, when I go through and interview people, it actually makes me think of. So I think it was the head of people over at Southwest Airlines, and the story that was told to me was they would have someone pick you up from the airport. Um, the receptionist would then greet you. They put you in this room, and someone would be there, like, "Hey, can I get you coffee?" And every single one of those persons was part of the interview, and how you treat them um, determined whether you got the job. And sometimes, they'd intentionally make you sit in that waiting room, and so you're 20 minutes past your interview time, and to see how you handled that, and whether you were mean to the receptionist when she came in and said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Boss is busy right now, but he'll be here as soon as possible." And then they'd create small talk, right? And the receptionist start chit chatting, and if the person was just cold and brash, like maybe they can be an introvert, that's okay, but if they're mean, that's not okay. And so after all that process, every single one of those individuals you talked to had a vote in whether you were hired or not. And there were some people interviewed really well, but yet suddenly, when you talk to the other people who touched that interview process, they said, no, that guy was rude to me, that person treated me like I was beneath them. And you can't have that in your business, right? Because that's very deceitful, it's manipulative. And so when I look at it, I apply a little bit of that to the process. And it's important to make sure everyone feels comfortable and that the person's going to work well with them, right?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Somebody actually did that to me. One of my first sales jobs. I worked for this company in Philadelphia, and they I didn't realize actually. Until you just said that, I probably didn't realize that's what they were doing to me. But they had somebody pick me up from the airport, and then they took me to the office, and you know, almost verbatim what you just talked about. It was a water cooler company, and we were selling water coolers and ice and stuff. And it was like one of my first sales. Actually, it was my first sales job when I moved to Kansas City, and they flew me out there and stuff. And I didn't even realize what they're. Now that you say that, I'm looking back on it. I'm like, that's probably what they were doing to me. But that's a great philosophy, because how people treat your other people when they're not looking is a better depiction of how they actually are when they're versus how they're talking to the person that's going to hire them. You know.
Right. Yeah. There's this book called Ego is the Enemy. I don't know if you guys have had the chance to read that, but at the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to weed out is people with egos, because when you think about 360-degree management, everyone's your customer. where, when you talk about, I have to work with Sally over here, maybe a subordinate, but you're still working with them. And in a sense, they're a customer. If you treat them that way, then everyone's going to get along and everyone's going to respect each other, and you'll be able to accomplish so much more, because no one really likes to be talked down to. No one likes to be treated horribly. I mean, you name one person that you think of that really says, that's what I want out of life. And, we're at work. In a lot of cases, we're at work more times than we're at home. And so you have to make sure that you can feel at home at work as well.
Yeah, I would say that the culture is a very telling sign of a company's trajectory. You can go in and sit in, with any founder and a few of their staff for an hour and really know what that culture is by the end of that pretty easily, right? And, it just takes a little bit of care, like you said, to align it and not have the wrong people in the right seats, right?
That's right. Yeah, and the way I would say it is, there's a lot of bad habits that you don't want to bring into your business, right? Because those are distractions, they're cancers. And so when you're spending your time trying to fix personnel issues because people aren't getting along, or Bob's not doing his part of the process, and now you're no one's rowing in the right direction, right? You got this person not rowing, this person over here rowing the opposite direction, and it's killing the momentum of where you're trying to head and what 0 degrees north is for you as a company.
Yeah. So I've got an off the books question, and you don't, we can cut this out if you don't want to answer this, but tell us about a time that you or the company almost went bankrupt. Like, I know this is a concept that most people don't want to talk about, but it's the reality of owning a business. People, when they start a company, or there's certain points, and it doesn't matter whether they've got 10 employees or 100 or 1,000. At some point, every company hits like the fork in the road, right, where they're at a decision that they're like, okay, my back is against the wall. We are in a very precarious situation, and the next move either makes us or breaks us, and we're either about to go out of business or we're about to make this thing work. Do you have a situation like that you've gone through where where your back was against the wall and you felt like, I'm on the verge of of losing this entire thing I've built? I'm curious if you have a situation like that.
Yeah. So we have the benefit that our CEO is an accountant by trade, and that, so I don't know if we've ever been to the point where we were bankrupt, but we were definitely in places where we didn't want to be, and a level of uncomfortability with our bank account, right? Where we were taking pay cuts. And so I guess you could almost say that was, that point where we felt the fear of saying, hey, is this going to work out? And you're pushing your customers to pay and they just don't want to. I mean, we have some customers that haven't paid for 9 months, right? And you're just hoping that they're going to catch up, and you see that receivables balance continue to grow, and you see your cash shrinking to the point where you're thinking, I only have 2 more months or 1 more month of run rate before we don't know what to do. And yeah, I would say right before we raised capital, we were kind of that place where we felt, we were skirting that bank account. And every time you had this huge growth, you're holding the bag for at least 3 months of payroll before a customer would pay you. And so you kind of get an aversion to rapid growth, and you start wondering if what you're doing is the right thing, and whether you just want to say, hey, this is not for me. It's for people with stronger stomachs, I guess.
Yeah. The whole net payment terms and stuff are, when you're in a business like that, it's a whole different beast of a business. Like, I remember when we started our first recruiting company, we started hiring all this IT talent. We were doing permanent placements. You just get paid up front, and it's gravy. But then we were like, we want to grow faster, and there's way more money in doing contract placements. But then we started doing some of these contract placements, and we're like, oh my gosh, what did we just get ourselves into? Because now we're paying, we're bringing on these employees, we're paying benefits, we're hiring them, we're paying them hourly wages, and then the first customer we ever signed, we had next 60 payment terms, and so we're like fronting all these costs. And we started this company with 10 grand in the spare bedroom of an apartment. And then we had $4.5 million the first year. But, about 5 months through that, we were at a point where we were like, this is not looking good.
Yeah.
What did we do? Because we've got all the, like, on paper, it looks great. We've got all these employees, we've got all this, all these deals, but it's like people aren't paying us on time, and
Oh yeah.
it's a tough thing to get out of. So how do you go about getting yourself out of that situation? Did you guys utilize, was that when you guys determined that you needed to raise money? Because I know that was kind of a lengthy process. Or do you have lines of credit and stuff that you were able to tap into,
Yeah.
or what would you suggest for somebody that's in that situation too?
Yeah, it's tough because I think when it's your business, it's your house you're putting on the line. You have to put collateral down to get a loan. Whereas that's really one of the things that drove us to saying maybe it's time to get an investment partner
Yeah.
who can de-risk that from us and decouple it. Because every time we needed to raise funds, you're putting your house up for collateral. So yeah, there were times when, mainly our CEO was pulling money out of his 401k, who, he was putting his house as collateral or anything he had that he could to make sure that we had the capital to run the business on a routine basis. And there were also times, talking about those tough times, where we all said, hey, Han, you need to slow down marketing. Maybe we don't sell for a little bit, let's get the caboose caught up. And that's asinine that you would want that. But when your bank account's running in the reds, it starts to get scary and you start making those decisions.
Yeah, that's cool. Austin, you got anything?
Oh, I got a lot. I'm trying to see where to dive in.
I've been hogging the questions over here, so.
Did you guys ever go forward on that $14,000? That baffled. I mean, the fact. I mean, and I get now that I'm correlating these two together. The fact that your CEO is a CPA by trade, my brother's a CPA, and so that's huge because I see a lot of companies, and I would say, without throwing a random number out there, I would say probably 90% at least of the companies that fail in that time where they should have been working on getting capital with debt or equity 2 months prior is they're operators. They're not CPAs. They don't understand. And it's not even an understanding. A lot of it's just a lack of doing it, right? Just a lack of setting up that process. But that's the thing that can crush companies so quickly. And I get it, with these startups, that we deal with, especially right when they're hitting post revenue, they're just trying to get some sales, right? They're just trying to get some revenue. And, and then it's, they learn over time, and hopefully it wasn't a detriment to their business that they learned, and they learned by coaching or by somebody who came in with equity of teaching them and implementing some of these components. But did you guys ever go so at $8 million, what I'm saying is like at an $8 million snapshot of your guys' company, that 14,000 was that heavy of a decision, shows that you guys really pay attention to ROI on decisions for reinvestment. And so, did you guys go through with that $14,000 healthcare initiative and bite the bullet on that?
Yeah, luckily we did, but I'm not going to lie and say it wasn't without a lot of heated discussions, right? Because that was probably one of the largest investments we had made at any time that had no real connection to value at the time, because we didn't have any healthcare customers lined up. We didn't have them coming through our marketing funnels. And so it was very aspirational. We ended up making the investment, and now fast forward, we're glad we did, because over 50% of our revenue is in healthcare, which,
that's nuts.
For us, when we think about it, at the time, we were trying to target industries that what we would call recession proof, right? Because we had been through a couple recessions throughout our careers. And so we said, let's make sure we're de-risking our business by choosing the right industries as our ideal customer profile. And healthcare was one of those, but we weren't even in it. We didn't even have one customer logo. And so, yeah, we made the decision, and now fast forward, here we are. I think we made that decision, it was in 2014. And 10 years later, half of our customers.
That's amazing.
That's wild. That's wild.
What are the other healthcare you went into? But I mean, BPO in itself, it seems recession proof, right? I mean, the ability to outsource those costs, especially, I mean, I think, in the venture world, startup world, a lot of them are using, VAs or BPOs or some kind of outsourcing model because they don't have those managers yet to implement and recreate that for themselves internally. And so how would you suggest that from a startup standpoint and staffing standpoint, without, obviously you guys do this as a service, as your business, but just educationally thinking through how do you scale up some of these services without a BPO, we'll say, right? Like, because they're hiring their first, person to do a non-revenue position, right? What do they need to be thinking through in those non-revenue positions as they're a startup with very minimal capital? Maybe they're in the middle of trying to raise capital, right? But they need to hit revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think most business owners, when they're going through this process of growing, and they get to a point where there are certain roles that are, in a sense, that could be a distraction from growing, right? What really grows companies is sales, right? And so the leaders of the business are focused on sales, but soon enough, the sales are going well. What's the byproduct of that? Well, now you're getting customer calls. So now you got to start a customer care team. And next thing you know, your focus is halftime over here, hiring, training, worrying about metrics here, and halftime growing your business. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that state where then they say, do I need to hire someone else to manage this? But then it's still more investment, more time and energy trying to solve the problem. And that's probably where most people think about our business is they say, hey, this is a huge distraction. I'm to the point where I want to deliver great customer experiences, but that's not my expertise. And so I'm going to go ahead and outsource that. A good example was Briggs and Stratton was one of our customers, and they called us up and said, look, we're really good at creating small engines. We're really good at marketing and selling them. But honestly, we're not good at the customer experience, but we want to be. We want to be known for that. And so we realized we need to partner with someone who does this every single day. And they partnered with us and said, hey, but at the same time, you got to do it with this budget, right? And at the time, they were dropping phone calls, and it was 1 to 2 hour wait times during peak season. And so with our experience and background, we came in there and said, hey, we could solve this by doing X, Y, and Z, because we had the processes, the people, and the technology to do it. And so
because I see these, you see those ebbs and flows where it's sales, dip down to hire some non-sales. And then, eventually over time, if you're not prepped and tracking everything, it ends up being, I'm just handling fires all day. And you got too much into reactive and too much out of, being prepared and kind of having your roadmap in mind, right? Not you, but I'm just saying a lot of founders, I think that's where they hit these roadblocks. How would you go through and help somebody navigate through that? Or how'd you guys navigate through? Because that still happens, I'm sure, today, right? Where's your focus from driving the growth while still making sure you're staying on a plan to not have that growth go right away? Because that's what happens, right? Is you grow the sales and you weren't having your customer experience kind of go. It can fall behind a little bit, I'm sure, but eventually it's got to catch up. And so how do you constantly watch both sides of it to make sure that you're not just spinning your wheels? Because that's what happens when you don't get those non-revenue positions, is you're just spinning your wheels, just replacing clients.
Especially right? With a startup that has limited resources, they've got limited employees, and they can't just delegate people to handle that,
Yeah. I think what can be measured can be improved, and so it's important to be able to make sure you have the instruments to measure where things are going right, where things are going wrong, and then hiring people to solve those problems. You know, whereas I think in a lot of cases it's hard because getting the right technology in place to measure those things, so you know when things are going right or wrong, um, it's expensive, right? And I think that's another phase of companies' growth is where they're like, well, I now have, let's say, 100 employees, and now I'm going to have to go and implement a CRM that because we've evolved, and that CRM is going to cost me $50 per seat or whatever, and that's an added expense that you didn't plan for. But the jump to do that is important because now you have the instruments to manage your business, and you can do without emotion, right? You're more process based versus emotion based, whereas you can say, okay, we're dropping 20% of our phone calls, for example. Each one of those is worth $100 per call because they're calling in to buy something. And so I'm losing, and you can actually calculate the math and say, I'm losing this much money. It's worth the investment, right? It's worth, but if you didn't have those instruments, you didn't know what your average customer value was or lifetime value, then, you're flying blind and you don't know where to invest.
Yeah. And that brings up I was going to say, I would dive in eventually here today sometime on this, but KPIs, I think I would love to dive in and get your brain on that. But Adam, did you have something?
No, that's kind of the route I was going to, because I know last time I was in there and we were in the in the office that you're in right now, and you've got a big screen up behind you with with all your company KPIs, for new deals and revenue and stuff month by month, and you guys are tracking that constantly. And I know you whipped out a big old thick book, called the Han Sales Bible or something, and you've got this whole process you've built out that's very impressive. But you can tell just walking through your office and you see your charts on the wall and you see things like that. You can tell that you're very integrated with tracking your metrics, and understanding your KPIs and understanding, if we do this, it produces this, and where everything's at, and looking at your growth patterns and your charts and trends and things like that. So I would love to know more about that too, and how you built out that system, and at what point you built that out too. Was there a change? Was there something that happened in the business where, were you always good at tracking this? Was this something you learned at a prior company, or did you figure that out at a certain point here and realize we need to get better about tracking certain things, and then you decided to implement it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, I've always been more of an analytical guy. I like the math and how it all adds up. I think we've always wanted to get to a degree of comfort knowing when I put $1 in, I'm going to get 10, right? And getting to that level of sophistication in your business doesn't happen overnight, right? Because once again, I think it goes back. You have to have the instruments. You have to be able to measure them, and then you can do the math. There's a lot of Excel spreadsheeting at the time, making sure that what you want to be able to tell is that you have a machine. And I think getting from small business mindset into a growth mindset as an entrepreneur, the challenge you run into is, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, it's them doing the growth, it's them doing the sales, and that's not duplicatable. And so asking yourself, how do I make this duplicatable, right? Obviously, you as the CEO or whoever in that role, you're going to be the most passionate about growing your business, right? And so I think a lot of people have a hard time letting that go and saying, I have to find people I can trust, and then making sure I understand my sales funnel, that I understand the pieces that go into this and the revenue generated by it.
I've got an interesting question for you. So one of the things I see when I talk to founders a lot, especially when they're starting out, is they focus too much on metrics when they don't have data. And initially they have no track record. They don't have enough sales. They're spending all their time trying to create these systems to overanalyze data that they don't even have. It's like, okay, we want to know everything that's going on. I want to set up all these things. I want to invest all this time and money to track all this stuff when they don't even have anything to track yet. My philosophy, and I'd be curious, to hear where you differ from me on this, if you do. But is initially when a company's starting out, there's going to be some organized chaos at the beginning, because you just have to go out and make stuff happen for a while. You've just got to go out and create some chaos and get things going to create momentum, and then you manage it as you're going. But is that how, what's your thought on that? Because, a lot of these companies we talk to, they'll hit us up looking for capital, and we're in the conversations with them, and, we're talking about the business, and you can just tell that they're spending too much time too early on trying to create all this analytical systems, when they really just need to focus on growth. And then once they have the growth, then they can manage it and create predictability. Because you can't create predictability. You were talking about putting $1 in and getting $10 out. You can't do that if you don't even know how to put $1 in and get $2 out. If you don't have any sort of system and process going, you can't scale it yet. So what are your thoughts on, like an early stage person trying to implement KPIs? At what point is that a feasible thing to invest time and money into, versus just, going after growth and trying to get that momentum initially to even get your company off the ground?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think a lot of people get stuck in the technical weeds, and you have to begin with the end in mind. And like you were saying, like if you don't have any data to analyze, what's the point of having all this technology to analyze it, right? Or having and spending time there. And so I think getting strategic about it. So for example, instead of thinking, hey, I just need to be able to get 10 sales at this one, in this one area, taking a step back and beginning with the end in mind, saying, okay, how big is my addressable market? And how can I take bigger chunks of that and in a scalable model, right? And so, for example, if you say, hey, I'm going to go and sell my product at the farmer's market. Well, okay, so you can do that. How scalable is that, right? Well, I can do it at the other farmer's market down here and this one here too. But at what point do you have to start thinking bigger, right? And I think we all get stuck in that mode. It's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. I'm excited. I went and tried it once and it did really well. But then thinking, how do I get into grocery stores? How do I get into, so someone else is doing that for me. I'm not the one going to the farmer's market, right? And taking that step above it. So you actually have something, and then tying it back in is like, you can't analyze farmers market data, right? It's not always going to be duplicatable. And so you think about it from a level of, how do I make it duplicatable? If I get a partnership with Costco, for example, well, I think those numbers are going to make a lot more sense. And then what if I can get a partnership with Sam's Club? Or how do I get into this distribution model? And that will help exponentially grow your business. I mean, you think about, like, I think Blendtec, 70% of their business was through Costco at one time. They lost that contract, and now look, right? And so they've had to retract and shrink. And so, but that they have the data, and then tying into something I said earlier, concentration risk, right? So you have all these things to think about.
Yeah, because if all your revenue is coming, if you have 70% of your revenue coming from one customer, that's a scary place to be too. Because you lose that one customer, your risk outlay is very high. You better be good at servicing it. So how do you focus on, because obviously there's quality and then there's quantity. So when somebody's growing their business, and they like if they want to go get into these bigger opportunities, like say somebody had some sort of product like that, and they're going farmers markets, like that is it's not predictable, but it's easy because it's low hanging fruit that they know they can go generate. They have physical control over going there and making stuff happen. Whereas, breaking into bigger opportunities like a Costco, for instance, takes time. There's a long due diligence process. You have to have, lots of, you have to have your manufacturing. There's lots of aspects you have to get teed up before you go into that. How do you balance, even with your company, when you were in the smaller stages, chasing big opportunities that are more cumbersome, they take a long time, they've got a huge potential, but they don't pay the bills now. How do you balance chasing long-term big opportunities versus the smaller ones that pay the bills and get everybody fed right now?
And I think going into that, the money side has to do with that too, right?
Yeah.
What do you have as backing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like if you build it, they will come. Like sometimes that doesn't work as well, because then you have to, once you start getting down a path and you're like, well, do I have the capital to support this growth? And I think that it does come to, we always would talk about what's healthy and sustainable growth versus you get the one-time lift, um, but now it's taking all your energy. And so how do you build a model in your business where it's continually having a healthy growth trajectory? Um, and there have been times where we had to make that decision, saying maybe that's boxing above our weight class today, right? And so that's a tomorrow problem, and we don't go after that. And so, for example, um, government contracts is an example I would say in our business. You don't win them often, right? And it takes a lot of time. And so we had to finally say no, right? Let's not go after that. The RFPs are, 100 plus pages. You have to spend days and days of energy responding to these, but your odds of winning them. And so we said, hey, we're going to hold off on this, and we're going to go after the ones we think we can win. And then in the future, let's create a government division, and that's part of our roadmap. And I think you do have to be methodical about it. You have to build it in your roadmap, saying, and I have charts where I say, okay, here's my gray areas, right? These are not activated yet. These are my future industries, my market adjacencies. But I don't have the time and energy today to focus on that. But I need to think about it today, because there's a couple of things. It's kind of like a development tree when you're playing video games. You have to do this to get to here. And in order to get to here, you have to do these two things. Same thing in your business. You have to think about it that way. As everyone wants to be, the fully amped up superhero, but it takes time, and it takes steps to get there. And that's also a learning journey. And you're developing processes along the way so that you can handle it without breaking your engine.
Yeah, yeah, because you go into something too big too soon, it can that is what bankrupts a lot of people too. They get overly ambitious, and they take on too much too soon, and they don't have the bandwidth to be able to the bandwidth or the funding or the resources or even the knowledge and know-how, to be able to manage that. That's a great point.
Yeah. And then if your customer doesn't pay you, they go bankrupt, and now you've got a lot invested in that without a way out.
Yeah.
You want to pivot a little bit and talk about Black Bay and Han's involvement there, and the value of what a lot of these founders are going to be able to get, with limited access, obviously. But Han, what are your thoughts in venture capital? What are you excited about most with Black Bay and what we're doing there?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I would say the most exciting thing is looking at all these different businesses and how you can help them, right? Obviously, every one of us on this have had different experiences, different businesses, and being able to go out there and collectively help other businesses succeed, and answering and solving problems that maybe people have what I would call a dot. And so there's this book that I had read. It talked about like dot people, and sometimes people get stuck with this dot, right? And they can't see past it because they're in their space, and it just takes sometimes. And in this example, you have a plate in front of your face, a dinner plate. If you push it back further, you now can see the landscape behind it and be able to solve where you're going. And so I think, Black Bay, its purpose is helping people get past their dot, right? And helping them, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an advisory standpoint, and having a sounding board. Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs out there, yeah, they can talk to their friends, but having a large pool of people to be their sounding board, to give them direction, think about things they're not thinking about today, and maybe taking their thinking to the higher level sometimes. I think that's exciting. And I think that's part of the purpose of Black Bay.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we're glad you're involved, because that's truly where we feel, and not that there's any wrong thing with, the traditional VC of having a bunch of analysts, there's value in that too. But, I think just the way that we all think about, getting in the weeds and not being afraid of the work and using the resourcing, that it's just so valuable. I mean, the value of money for an entrepreneur, in my opinion, it only is so valuable because without the knowledge to surround it, it's kind of meaningless, right? And so that's why I've always loved the idea of the strategic alignments in founders and capital sources, because there's no reason not to.
Yeah, and like, you hear the statistic about lottery winners, that the vast majority of lottery winners, they get a big influx of cash and they all go broke within, like 95% of them are broke and have no money within 5 years. It's no different with entrepreneurs that get a huge injection of capital and they don't have advice or knowledge on how to properly utilize it. It's no different than winning the lottery and getting a huge injection of cash that you don't know how to manage. And I think that's one of the big issues with traditional VCs, that these companies are just injecting capital into these businesses, but the businesses don't know how to utilize it. They're no different than a lottery winner that just got handed $5 million and they're out there buying things they shouldn't because they don't understand how to multiply it. It's an acquired skill, learning how to multiply and manage money. And that's really where I think we come in well, because we're really looking at bringing that advisory type atmosphere into the companies and being a part of making sure that we've got money, but more so we want to make sure that you utilize it well. That's why we don't think that traditional VC has to have 9 out of 10 of them fail, because it comes down to a systematical flaw, not the industry as a whole. It's the process in which most people go about it, and that's what we're trying to change. And I'm excited to have Han on board because I think he brings a very unique perspective into what we're doing. With international business, with having worked with so many. He's bought companies. He's acquired tons of companies. He's invested in projects. He's raised money. He's deployed money. He's hired thousands of people. All across the world. And not only that, but within the companies that he works with, his company, what they do is they go in and they look at, the systems and the processes of businesses to find out where can this business be improved? Working with the founders on, okay, we can outsource, your technical support. We can outsource this. We can help you restructure these areas to create the maximum ROI on your dollars. And that's a extremely valuable asset that a lot of people don't even really know they need or know exists. And, so I'm excited to have you on board. I think you're going to be a very, very, very valuable part of what we're doing. And, I value you
likewise
as a friend and business partner. You're just an awesome guy. And I'm glad we could get you on the show today too.
No, thanks. I'm extremely humbled. You guys are great. And, the fact that you chose me to be part of this, it's very humbling. So I appreciate you guys giving me the time and thinking about it.
Yep. Well, we look forward to big things coming. It's going to be a great next 5 years. So
likewise.
With that, thanks for listening today, everybody. We'll be back soon with more valuable content. So
awesome. Thanks, Han. I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah. It was nice hanging out with you guys. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. Hopefully one day we can meet in person.